please come to the stage. Look forward to hearing from you.
Good morning, guys. How's it going? Well? Very well, very well. So I'm going to start today with a story. I think stories are nice. People relate to stories and you follow an arc, right? And this story is a personal one. It relates to a meeting I had probably 2017 with a very prominent asset management company in London. I'll set the scene for you before I go into it. So this was 2017. A lot of things were happening in the world then. You know, Trump was elected, Macron was elected, beat Le Pen. Xi Jinping gave a very important speech at Davos. Mosul was captured by ISIS. A lot of international things. So I was brought in to really discuss these topics with this firm, speaking with their chief investment officer. So in the meeting, we sat down, central London, very swanky as you can imagine. And we had a conversation about how they engage with emerging markets. They invest heavily in emerging markets and they were curious as to our approach. But I was at the same time curious to their approach, see how they actually go about analyzing these markets and making investment decisions. And since they invested in emerging markets, I asked them, who conducts your geopolitical risk analysis? Given the fact that there's a lot more volatility in emerging markets for stuff like this. And he turned around to me and said, Klitzman, we don't do geopolitical risk analysis. I said, why? He said, we read the FT. I said, okay. My jaw dropped at that moment. I had to clean it up because it was a shocking statement, as you can imagine. And I left that meeting obviously quite shocked. And I'd say probably a little offended, not to myself, but at the investors whose money was placed in their care to invest in the long-term future. And I thought to myself, this experience I've heard before by different people, be they governments at some points, corporations of different calibers. And I thought there must be a reason as to why there's such short-term thinking and such shallow thinking when it comes time to these very important issues. So as it relates to the SDG goals, it's curious because we have a system in place now where we need to think long-term. We have these goals which are over 30 years, right? From the Millennium Development Goals, as we can remember, they're past history now, to now these new goals, which hopefully, as an international community, will do something about. But we tend to think in very short-term time cycles. And I thought long-term issues, short-term time cycles is a big gap in making plans for the future. So I thought with the organization that we founded, Pareto Economics, we needed to think long-term. So we needed to start with a very long-term question, a statement which really encapsulates what we're trying to do. How do I go next? This isn't working. Anyway, well, there we go. Okay, fantastic, now it works. So the question that we're trying to answer and encapsulate is the following. How will the world be changed and challenged over the next 100 years? And to an extent, everyone in this room and everyone watching online and everyone who gets to hear this talk really is trying to answer a derivative of this question in their own capacity, right? How is this country going to develop over this investment period? Should I invest here? What are the risks of investing there, right? And if we have these short-term time cycles, then we'll never come up with long-term strategy. And that's the thing that's plaguing, I think, the achievement of these millennium, Freudian slip, these sustainable development goals. So in order to answer this question, you need to really begin at a very core place. You need to really have some core assumptions that you make about the world, which will allow you to think long-term, okay? So for our starting point, we really have three core assumptions that we make about the world, which we use in our analysis, which then we can provide effective consulting and research to our clients, okay? So our first assumption, and I'm going to move about a bit if that's okay with you. Our first assumption is that the nation state or a country is the primary driver of world affairs, right? It's a very realist way of looking at the world. Very Kissinger-esque, I suppose. And this can be proven. We have, if you think about it, people are citizens of countries, wars happen between countries, countries pass legislation, tariffs are placed at the borders of countries, international organizations, for example, are allowed to exist by countries to serve countries, and corporations can thrive or suffer by one stroke of the legislative pen. So that's our first assumption. that if you're going to look at how the world develops, especially as an investor, as a corporation, or as a country representative, you need to look at the world through a country lens. The next assumption is try to understand, what do countries want? And in our estimations, countries want power, right? And when we speak to country representatives about this, they have a very sort of a somber look about them, because they know that's what it is, but it's hard to define a lot of the time. So how do we define power in this context? And in our estimation, power isn't the ability of one country to force the other to do what it wants, right? But rather, power is the ability of a country to secure their own interests. Okay, I'll say it again. It's the ability of a country to secure their own interests. Now, this isn't in a binary expression. It's not a case that some are able and some aren't able. It's more on a continuum, all right? So the next question became for us, how does a country go about securing their own interests? What do they have at their disposal to do so? And this is where we've developed something called the centers of power model. Now, I'm not going to get too technical, but this is a very simple graph, and this forms the essence of the work that we do and why it's important to this room, and we'll get into it. So what we're saying is that each country has at their capacity these, what we call 6 centers of power, which they can use to secure their own interests, right? Their active consumer markets, their military balances, their technological leadership, their systemically important commodities, geostrategic positioning, and their financial strength. So when a new country is introduced into the world, like for example South Sudan or Kosovo, for example, they automatically adopt these 6 centers of powers depending on their region, on their geographic borders, and what they have within them, and the capacity in there. So then what we did is that we quantified these 6 measures, and we've ranked 194 countries against them in order to find out how much of an ability do these countries have to secure their own interests through these models. And then what we did in the middle of the Global Power Index, we essentially added all of these sub-indices up, and we created a super index called the Global Power Index, right? In order to measure the power of countries, or the ability to secure their own interests. So power, in fact, isn't sort of a metric which you use to gauge how much violent a country can be against another, but rather power is a unit of measurement. Just like millimeters, miles, hectares, or light years, power is a unit of measurement which measures the ability of a country to secure their own interests. So we try to quantify this as much as possible. And this measure ranks from 0 to moderate power to 600, which is exceptional power. So what I'm about to show you on the next slide is how the world ranks, or at least the top 90 countries. If you want the full report, you can speak to myself afterwards and we can email it to you or go onto our website. But what you're about to see is the top 90 countries in our Global Power Index, okay? Before that, we break the world down into 7 regions. This is how the world is segmented by us. Different regions there, you can read them: North, South America, Europe, Asia Pacific, etc. And then what we've done is across the regions, we have the regions there, and then we have the indices across the vertical too. So what we're going to be looking at is the one in blue, the GPI all, where we'll be looking at all the countries in the GPI, but for this case, the top 90. So are you ready to see what the world looks like? Have you got any estimations in your mind as to who would rank first, second, and third? I'm sure you do. But the results might shock you. I'll leave that up for you for a second to read. And whilst you're looking at that, I'll explain what the colors mean. So the ones in yellow show that there's been no movement from last year to this year, okay? The colors in green show an uptick in ranking. The colors in red show a downturn in ranking. And the blue colors show new countries which have been added to the index from last year onto this year. So this is what the world looks like, and this is how we see from our analysis the world shaping up, okay? And we can go into asking questions as to why this is there, why that's like that. But this essentially is a collection of the sub-indices added together to show a holistic view on how the world looks like. Again, we have until 194, but this is what we have just for ease sake. Some notable examples: for example, South Africa at 58, we have Finland at 26, Italy at 13, Morocco at 78, Gabon at 87, Kuwait at 89, US number 1, China 2, France 3, Singapore 4, UK 5. Top 5 are there. So some highlights from this year's index, at least, we see the following. The Netherlands ranked as the highest newcomer to the index from last year. The lowest ranked newcomer is North Korea. And in fact, they rank the lowest at 194 in the world for the ability to secure their own interests. Europe ranks as the highest performing region, and Sub-Saharan Africa ranks as the lowest performing region. Again, the in-between ones can be accessed through our report, but these are just some highlights for you guys to understand. So when it comes time to the SDG goals, what this index can help you do is to see at what level and at what capacity are these countries to take on responsibility and to innovate further for these, and also to look at unrealized potential to invest in specific countries which have, although being low, doesn't mean they're there and they'll stay there, but they have the biggest upswing possible. So it's not to say that the countries which are ranked the highest doesn't mean they'll be there for forever. It could mean that they've reached their pinnacle. Countries which are ranked slightly lower have the ability to move up based on proper policies, leadership, good investment strategies, etc. So this gives you a view of this. So I'm not going to show you all of these, but this is something that we've created as well called the volatility change in countries, which means from last year to this year, how much movement within each region have countries moved up or down. So I'm only going to be showing Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa. If you want all the regions, again, we have the report. So if you look at Europe, the least volatile countries, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, which haven't moved much, up or down one place. Whereas Bulgaria, Serbia, and Romania have moved quite a lot, minus 18 to minus 15 places down. So this shows you from last year to this year what has happened in the world. And this is a starting point to investigate why are these changes occurring, and if you're an investor, to find out what you can do about it, if it impacts you. If you're a country which wants to partner with one of these countries, why is this the case? Is there anything we should know about this country moving forward that we haven't analyzed already? To have a universal view, a 360-degree view of a country's potential and where it's going into the future. Sub-Saharan Africa, this is the way that it looks. So Nigeria, Botswana, and South Africa, the least movements. So Nigeria hasn't moved at all from last year. And again, +1 movement up for Botswana and +2 movement up for South Africa. Zimbabwe has moved down minus 35, Mali minus 23, and the CAR minus 29. Okay, so this is just some highlights to the figures. Happy to take questions and answers afterwards, but this is what the world looks like as it stands. And in summary, what we can understand is when looking towards the SDG goals and what it means for countries as they develop in them, there are certain things that happen with countries when they become more powerful and when they slip down in power. So as you can imagine, this is very organic. Just like plants being planted in the right soil, they grow at different paces, and sometimes there's competition which sucks up their soil and sucks up their nutrients, and they go down. So in real terms, there are a few things that we've noticed that happen in the world for countries when they gain the ability to secure their own interests, and what happens when they lose the ability to secure their own interests. So these are just some of the highlights, and we've conducted extensive reports across many different countries on this. So one of the things is that they become more attractive to international trading blocs. So if you look at, for example, a thing like BRICS, which has taken 20 odd years to become important from 2001, we see countries now like Argentina, Mexico, and others wanting to join and having the attractiveness to join because overall they are in a place where they can offer more to the bloc than they take away. Okay? Also, when it comes time to trade barriers, what we see historically, trade and tariff and non-tariff barriers go up as countries become more prominent because they now have industries within their countries, domestic industries that they want to protect and grow and develop skill sets for. So the ability to trade with them or to sell into these markets become restricted. We see this, for example, with the United States, which is still quite protectionist, China also growing to be still very protectionist, and others across time, because they want to keep what they have of value and they want to create and they want to cultivate strength within their own economies. They tend to think over a much longer term period. If you have countries which are stagnating, high levels of corruption, weak institutions, they are the ones who think very short term. But again, if you are stable, if you're growing, your time increments aren't every election cycle, but hopefully they're every 10, 20 years, depending on what vision you have for the country and how much buy-in you have from the public. On the other side, if you're weak, you're thinking in very short-term time cycles because you're not interested in what the country looks like over a long period of time because there's political volatility happening in your region and your country, and the incentives are different. They're also able to leverage what I mentioned before, their COPs or their centers of power much more so. So when it comes time to debating or to negotiating at the trade table, at the WTO, for example, they're able to leverage their centers of power and gain more at the negotiating table because they have more to work with. A fantastic case study is a country like Saudi Arabia. Back in the 20s, it was a fledgling country. It was sort of not as powerful as today at all. As oil was discovered and taken advantage of, they developed their industries, and now they're a very prominent power in the world, and definitely regionally, because they're able to develop these things. So for country leaders in this room, and for investors in this room, it's very important to see the trajectory of countries through a lens which is quantitative and which is long-term. Because we know what the alternative looks like. And no one wants to be here in 5 more years saying we rely on the FT, although they are a very good publication, but to rely on long-term investment trends on just short, I would say at some points profane and shallow analysis that you can't really base your investment strategy upon. You can use that as a starting point. You need much more longer-term thinking. So this is what I want to impart on you today, and to have you thinking more long-term when you're looking into your investment strategies and what to look at when making these investment decisions. Thank you very much.